give me just a little background on you and what you're planning on showing us today.
Uh, as you mentioned, I'm a storyboard artist. I started storyboarding early 2000s. My first opportunity was actually working at EA on Command and Conquer Generals 2. I was a cinematic storyboard artist, which was crazy because it was like the first time I had ever gotten like a big actual job. Like I'd done like Craigslist storyboard jobs for like indie films and commercials, and then thrown right into the mix on a AAA title that eventually they didn't use the cinematics because they changed the game to a totally different kind of platform. But it was like a great learning experience for me. And then from there on, I've just kind of been completely freelance for over a decade now, working on TV shows, mostly advertising and commercials. The one kind of niche that I found for at least my career is I do a lot of special shoot teaser content. So like, for instance, some anything that has to do with Deadpool, I've usually done storyboards for, working with like but it's not usually working on the film itself. It's working on the writers and collaborations with like Ryan Reynolds and his team of what they come up with and what 20th Century Fox, now Disney, will eventually do to promote the film. And when they have stuff there's using footage of, but then they want to interstitial it with like special kind of content because maybe even the show hasn't been even finished shooting or the movie isn't finished, they'll go out and shoot a special, footage or VFX that needs storyboards to pitch to creative studios, everybody. So that's kind of my niche. I work with David initially on his short film Plug, doing everything from storyboards to painting props to, just it was a great time. Just kind of, it was like an ILM, kind of days. People in a garage with glue and painting and drawing, and I think I even held the clapper on the shoot, actually.
You're a man of many talents. I'm curious to know
Yeah, yeah.
how did you become associated with Deadpool in all of those projects?
That was working with the marketing team at 20th Century Fox. I like to say, even though unofficially, I get word from the middleman that, Ryan Reynolds loves my stuff, but I'm like his unofficial storyboard artist. I've drawn everything from like Deadpool, Deadpool 2, uh, Free Guy, so much stuff for Free Guy I did. And a lot of it, I don't even know if they did anything with the things I stored, but he pays my bills unofficially, just drawing his face.
That's pretty amazing. Well, I guess I'll hope to see, and I imagine you'll be involved in some of the next stuff that we have coming up here with this transition into the Disney family and the Disney world. I know
Yeah,
there's a lot coming out
absolutely.
on that. That's super exciting to hear, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, David gave me a call to do some boards here on Moon Control. So what was really interesting about this project and working with David is he's very um, kind of hands off, not in the sense that he doesn't have time, but more in the sense he trusts his artists to kind of interpret the words into how he sees them, and then he'll give feedback and stuff, which is, you know, it's either one or the other. You're either the drawing hand for someone who can't, or, basically you're a second director kind of situation. And it's always more fun to be a second director in that respect. So for the people watching, is this the first they're hearing of Moon Control? Do I have to
We
explain it or
no, actually, we've been
okay,
covering Moon Control pretty in depthly
all
this
day?
weekend. We've talked to David a few
Okay.
times, but from your perspective, I'd love to know what it is that you're bringing to the table here. And I already see the visualization of some of these slides is very different than the stuff I've seen. So I'd love to talk about what you've
Yeah.
been contributing here.
I think what was unique here in this situation too is understanding the initial plan of how he wanted to shoot this and the production. So like he wanted to try and use as much virtual production as possible. So that gives you kind of a bit of a boundary to work in to try and be as creative as possible versus like, if we're going to all shoot it practical, on a soundstage, then, character drive is galore. But, the vibes that he was selling was like, It's you know, um, what was that? I think the reference he used a lot was red and blue, like Halo, like that kind of comedy kind of vibe between this actual dark story that's a commentary on corporate expansion into the universe, and these two personality types that are very. It's such a buddy cop show too, where like you have, the kind of roguish Frenchman and the more militarized, American, Canadian, whatever he may end up being at the end of this. But so like your focus on the character really has to be sold in the dialogue and eventually with the body language, because I think eventually too where they were trying to, with virtual production, maintain as little of shooting their faces as possible except for when it really matters. And we even implement in the storyboards here like focusing on something a little Iron Man style, because that way when you have your actor, it's kind of lopped off in this UI of what he's in front of a helmet kind of vibe. Because most of the characters themselves would either be CG or in a very closed quarter set, like the cockpit or of the vehicle. So I mean, you can only shoot that so many ways before it gets sort of repetitive. So you have to be creative with like, what do we got? We have a small cockpit, whether it's driving or the turret, and then we have the gorgeous landscape and the details of the vehicle. So it is very driven in two respects of what we're seeing of the vehicles to kind of build tension and what have you. Like we have this. I mean, we have David Levy designing, in charge of art directing this, so it's going to look gorgeous. Which I'm butchering it, with my storyboards, but
I
so that's
disagree. I
that's
mean, what I'm seeing here looks pretty spectacular, man.
well, I'm not afraid to use 3D either. So like they had already done some early 3D kind of designs, and I was like, please give them to me because that way I can walk around with my digital two fingers and find shots that I like, and that's a regular practice if there's time for it. If I can make a 3D model or I can find something where, that's I think that's something with storyboarding that any young person who wants to get into it is like, if you want to make pretty pictures, that's not what we do. That's not the job. If you have time at the end when you've met your objectives, great, but ultimately you need to just drive the story forward and get the shots in and make it clear. You have to make it clear. Someone has to read it and understand what it is, but you're not really spending a lot of time. So however you get there, for me, hey, we have a 3D model. Why don't I use 3D model so I can draw over it and let's get the shots. So
One of the
I think
underlying themes we've been going through, talking about Moon Control this weekend, is, of course, the rapid iteration, getting the ideas out as quickly as possible, and being in a collaborative environment that allows you to get there as quickly as you can. And David spent a lot of time talking about the interactions using Magma in this way to be able to collaborate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that's played out for you.
well, I mean, awesome. It's especially if you're working with someone who's an artist themselves. I mean, to get that instant visual feedback in real time is just uncanny. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times when I have to quote for any sort of job, there's at least a quarter of it that's just time waiting around for response and explanation from people to give feedback on what you created, and so you can move forward on whether it's revising, polishing, you know. So like for David, me trying to get stuff out as quickly as possible, probably more to the level of quality, something like these is what it started as, and he can tell me like, yep, that's good, yep, that's good, or it's actually more something like this, A, B, or C. And for someone like him, he can actually draw it and like doodle over it in real time versus, okay, let me go run, uh, create a PSD, draw it. All right, maybe he'll screen grab it, but this is just all right there. And even having his references down here, for me to pull from and get inspiration, the mood boards, I mean, and for him to edit these mood boards in real time and all have it, you know, I mean, these are all things that I feel like we've pulled these resources of being able to have your script, have your mood board, have your concept art all in one document to kind of pull from, are usually cannibalized from Google presentations, Pure Ref. You have like 10 different tabs open, but here it's like boom, boom, just pull it up instantly. What does that look like again? I don't know. And even for him to be able to be like, I actually want it to be more like this shot from Blade Runner. He could literally copy and paste it right under the panel so I could draw it. You know, like that's what Magma has really made amazing for storyboard artists. It's just the instant feedback. I mean, it's not often. I would imagine in animation, you know, because there's revisionists and stuff, like I feel like that would be a good place where actual dual artists, because it's like, all right, this one's good, someone else clean it up while I keep roughing stuff out, you know. But when you're working with directors, majority don't necessarily know how to draw. You know, it's even useful for them to be able to pull their own visual reference and drop it in for you to, for them to better explain to you, you know, what it is that they were thinking or what they want versus what you didn't get right. So it's a good tool for telling you how you didn't get it right and how to get it right the second time, you know. And
No,
yeah,
that's very cool and interesting insights. That's great to hear. I mean, it just goes to show you guys have such a crack team. Having David as a person who has that ability to utilize these tools as well and incorporate his ideas in a quick sketch and doing that all in one place just seems pretty amazing, honestly.
yeah, it's a lot of fun for sure. I'm still like so blown away at how well this works. You know, just like the fact I'm doing this from a browser, you know, or like I can't get Photoshop to work this fast sometimes, you know.
Yeah, that's huge props right there. Huge props. I love to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, and throw a little shade at Adobe. I don't mind. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of anything interesting to call out specifically. I mean, I'd have to say with like this early sequence where we're kind of slow crawling over this landscape of the moon from top down. I mean, a lot of kind of Blade Runner alien influence here, which I know David particularly is a fan of. Um, and then we kind of move into revealing the vehicle of Moon Control. And my approach was this was just, you know, I treated it like a car commercial, which I've done hundreds of, in sense of you don't reveal the brand exactly at the beginning, and you kind of leave the best bits for the end, and you start at some of these little well-designed details, um, slowly unwrapping the gift that you get, which is this badass monstrous rig, you know. Um, so that was kind of my approach with that, and then as we get into the cockpit, it's now we're getting into the dialogue. Now we're getting into a Kevin Smith world, like two guys talking for like, you know, an extended period of time on, or a couple of guys in their patrol car, you know, going back and forth. So yeah, I mean that in itself is a challenge to try and keep it. I mean, not every shot needs to be its own unique composition. I mean, that is kind of the bonus of when you do a virtual production, is where you could make a million different angles because there's no setups like there is in real production, where they'd be like, all right, we're going to do two setups because we're, you know, the actor's tired and, you know, what have you. But people need lunch and things like that. With virtual production, it's like do it and then shoot it however you want, which is great as a storyboard artist because you literally the sky is the limit with what you're able to do and stuff like that. So yeah, I was just trying to think of innovative ways to use the cockpit, use little details to kind of offer different perspective while the characters are talking, because we're not always going to be focused on their faces, and we're certainly not going to be watching the exterior of their suit all the time. So you got to keep it moving. You got to keep the camera moving. You got to keep the angles changing a little bit just to help drive the dialogue. The dialogue's interesting, but we got to give the eyes something to feast on a little bit. And of course, that's always awesome when you're outside of the vehicle. I think at the time too, when I was working on this, I was super into For All Mankind, that Apple series. So that gave me a lot of kind of
I got into that one myself. It was actually some really interesting concepts that were inspiring.
yeah, and it felt perfect for what I was going to be working on. I actually can't remember what happened first. Either this, and then I started watching that. I think might have happened because I was like, I don't think about the moon that often. Is there any shows that focus on, you know?
Isn't that how it
Yeah,
goes? Sometimes it could be one or the other.
yeah, chicken or the egg. But yeah, that helped with like kind of getting in the mindset. That's a bit of my process too. Is like if I find things that things remind me of, I'll go and watch them. Not to steal necessarily, but to kind of get inspired and see how they approach this problem. And depending on when the film or TV show was made, we may be able to do things that they couldn't do, you know? So it's like, why not storyboard it, you know, kind of vibe. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any questions? Do you want me to walk through
Yeah, I
this a
would
little bit more?
say it's cool to see. So you guys are. I mean, I've seen a lot of sort of the bigger ensemble set pieces. These guys have showed a lot of that. You're showing a really unique take on the specifics of how these sequences are going to play out. I'd love to know just a little bit about just what the process is like for you creating a slide like this and going through and developing these ideas, incorporating 3D. How does that stuff work for you? How are you using Magma in this particular case to develop an image?
Sure. Well, usually my process is a little, it can be really efficient, and other times it's like, all right, I'm getting too focused because I'm working with David Levy and I want the things to look really pretty, and then you end up being too slow in the beginning, and then you realize, okay, I got to speed up, I got to make them. So we get things that sometimes we look like this, these shots here, and then you realize, oh wait, there's a lot more script here. Okay, so then we start getting into shots that look more like this. Um, the 3D is great, and I love using it when I have it. But sometimes even that can be slowed down a little bit because you're overthinking, and really like that first phase of when I get the script, read the whole script, obviously, and I generally, if I while I'm reading the script and I'm thinking of how I see it as I read it, and it's that clear to me, I'll usually do those frames first. I don't always go from beginning to end, And in fact, actually, if there's a harder thing, I'll usually do that first. If it calls for something where there's a lot of detail or generally an expansive background. In the case of this, um, there wasn't much yet. Um, it ended up by doing this part first only because in my mind, this is going to be the hardest bit because there's not really a design at the time of the moon base or the patrol. So like I got to figure out what that looks like and then figure out how I want to shoot it. So that was the slow process for me. Anytime I have to design um, and storytell at the same time, it's usually the more challenging because I think for a storyboard artist, the hardest challenge you have is when you don't know the space you're working in. Like I think I recently worked on something where it's like, which I probably can't say what it is, but it's like we don't have any designs for it yet, but basically it's a room, with like a couch and chairs and
Just
there's a
just
person.
just make it.
Yeah,
Just make
yeah,
it.
just make it, and it's like that's why I love 3D though, because even if I even obviously tech scouts are great where people can provide you photos, but I'll even opt to turn those photos into a basic 3D model so I can put myself in the space, and that's important for calling out details and blocking and the 180 rule and painting. I think that's important, and especially important with this with having the 3D model of the vehicle, because that is our space, that is our set, is that rig, and having that made it super paramount. So my process starts out generally if I'm smart that day and not try and bang it out, right the first time, I'll do more of a quality that is akin to something like this. Some just to start out, like, okay, we know what that is. That's a spaceman. He's behind his turret. That's where it starts. And if you're working with someone who can understand that, and usually I'll do a check-in. I'm like, if I go at this quality, do you know what I'm saying to you? You know, I'll usually work with the director and be like, is that clear enough for you? Be like, yes. All right, great. Then I can go at that pace, which is usually very fast. And I think I did a rough telling of this in maybe a day and a half, just like a first dirty go. You know what I mean? And then from there, we can discuss in real time and get that feedback of like, yeah, I'm loving all these shots. You know, when you go back to clean these up, make sure you call out this specific detail, or, you know, things like that. I think there was a term about that with a wine. When he's chilling his wine on his center console. I think David, um, his yeah, I think he was like, that was like a detail that he wanted to really call out, um, to represent, you know, his French roots. So I was like, all right, good, you know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, and that's typically the process. And then once everything is squared away as far as your blocking of the frames in that really rough, dirty kind of thumbnail, the rest is kind of autopilot fun. That's when you kind of, the hard part is the math of figuring out what these shots are and how do they work. And if he's got to do this here and travel this distance, but we don't want to spend that much time for the edit. I mean, it's just a million things go on, even in this dirty thumbnail, you know, arena. But after that's squared away and they like it and there's time left, then you can go back and make things look pretty, where you can get it more of almost a keyframe. I won't go as far as say that's a keyframe, but I mean, that's pretty nice for a storyboard from, you know, which is another bonus of 3D that lets you kind of not spend too much time. I mean, even things like this, I'm very happy with, and I can, with the 3D model there, I got a bit of lighting, I got form, I got its position. Now I can fill it with like blurs and, flares, throwing some debris and stuff like that. And that's the fun, that for me generally is the fun part. It's not that I'm still not used to Magma not hitting save as. I forget it's live. I keep trying to save it. um, yeah, that's the cool part though with Magma. I mean, even is just getting that feedback, and I don't know where they are going. I mean, it sounds like eventually they're just going to add every toy possible from every art program. I'm sure eventually they're going to get the ability to be able to not 3D model, but at least maybe have a model that you can import so you can rotate it and use it as some sort of reference. I mean, why not, right?
Absolutely. I
I'm
mean,
you know.
I'm still becoming aware of certain things myself, but I have heard those things in conversation, and it really is just about. I mean, the whole thing behind it is it's something we hear all the time in our industry, but by artists for artists is something that means a lot to people that use these tools so much. And if that's something that makes a difference in your workflow and being able to develop ideas, well, why not do that? Why not incorporate all of these great things into a place so we can all do our jobs better and enjoy the process while doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms too of being able to use, I mean, 3D is the way of the future. I mean, already so much computers. I'm waiting for AI to take my job. I'm just waiting for the day when, I work with this one company called Motion Studios, and they were doing a recent trailer for the show Shogun that's coming on in FX. I can talk about it. They've announced it. I just Google it quickly online if I can talk about it. And after we're done with the project, I had done this epic scene with hundreds of samurai and storyboard. I actually did it in 3D. I actually drew individual assets and scattered them in 3D because it was a huge fly through. And versus me like drawing 10 frames and redrawing a million samurai, I'll just draw the samurai, duplicate them a million times, randomize them, and then snap. I mean, I'm not afraid of any new technology that can get me to the picture, sooner, faster, so we can move on to the next thing. You know what I mean? But in the example of that, after the project was done, where we finished the commercial, they were playing with Midjourney, and he just typed in basically what I storyboarded out, and it gave you these renders. And I was like, great, that's awesome. So should when is Midjourney sending you invoices? You know, I was like, but
On that topic, something that we unveiled today here at Lightbox was an early iteration of Magma that's including Stable Diffusion on the right side. So now we have, and this is still experimental, but essentially this will something that they will be sharing after Lightbox. But the ability to type in a prompt, generate an image, and within the Magma tools, we can actually isolate an area with a black mask and tell it to infill that with a new prompt, or copy a layer and do another thing. So not only can you, and it's awesome to hear artists like yourself that are not afraid of these new things, and that's kind of been an underlying theme here as well, is like, if it gives you the ability to get to a quicker result, that 50% of it, you are still the talent. You're the one that has the real vision to modify that and tweak it. So why not embrace these things? And instead of having that as an external resource that you need to download and load back in and paste it in, you can just do it right in Magma and use that in your pipeline.
Absolutely. I mean, even I haven't tried it yet specifically. I haven't set aside to, but what I would find it most useful for me, the AI, is especially with a lot of advertising and the studio marketing stuff I do for everything has actor likenesses that you need, like sometimes really bizarre angles and expressions, like draw me Bill Murray with his low angle but with like a sad look. Like, how low of an angle reference can I find of Bill Murray? I don't know, but I bet AI could make one that's halfway decent that I could use as a pretty good reference, that's something super powerful. That I think it just finding good reference of how I think would be awesome for storyboard artists, for sure. Not often. I mean, I feel like a lot of guys that do more shooting stuff on TV shows and movies, which I've done. I've worked on the Orville and stuff like that. And even just because I do so much of that in advertising, I actually tried to achieve likeness. And I got pretty good at drawing Seth MacFarlane right off the bat. But, which is not hard. All you have to do is give him a nice mane and a sarcastic look on his face, and you got Seth MacFarlane.
Well, and it can't be said enough. I think that you guys have the talent and the ability to do these things, but part of the job in this particular world is rapid iteration and coming up with stuff. And a lot of times, time is the challenge. It's not necessarily the inability to do it. It's, you can make that portrait, you could do that thing, but if you can just get that quick iteration out with a companion tool, you can flex those skills in other ways. Maybe storyboarding and concept is not the place to do it.
No, well, I think I mean, that's definitely. I think that's more the ask for concept artists. I mean, that is the ask for them. I think they're all about making, well, I suppose a concept versus, I guess concept artists, do they do like the more keyframes, right? I mean, keyframes are definitely the ask of make a pretty picture, but concept art isn't always pretty, sometimes they don't even finish painting their legs, it's like usually a really good blob, a guy I went to school with, he's probably more famous now, but he works at Blizzard, and his name's Cole Eastburn, and he does digital painting from like the foundation of the masters, like Sargent and Da Vinci and stuff. I remember when I went to school with him, like he'd be like, "What are you doing on Friday night?" "I'm going to Barnes and Noble. I'm just copying books." Anyway, my point was that he could make something super high rendered in the face and the chest and armor and stuff, but when it gets to the parts where it's not as important to articulate for the concept, you could literally see what size brushstroke it was, because he's also knowing what is important and how do we get there. And I think of any professional, whether it's concept or storyboarding, is getting the important information down first. Can I take what you just did in this amount of time that you have to do it and run with it? And I think that's always my goal too, is just to, all right, this can sell. Someone knows what this is, like going from this frame to this frame, we get the idea. It's a landscape, there's an object, the smoke is trailing forward. We know that it's moving in that direction. That's enough that if for whatever reason we had to stop immediately right now, they could run with this. You know, they're like, I always imagine, here's the story that happens, is like, you start a project, by the end of the day, the funding's cut, but we still need it. So how do I storyboard that in a way where that'll be useful? That's kind of that's the rush mindset. But with, you know, using a software like Magma, I mean, even just the ability to have these thumbnails like right here. So we laid these pages out afterwards, but normally my process, this would be the storyboard. This would be the frame. You know, we could have, you know, that's frame one, and then adding another frame right there where I can do like a landscape and stuff and be able to switch between them that quickly and have them on the screen versus using something like Photoshop where you have to open files up. And they do have the animation like timeline at the bottom, but it's super confusing with all the layers and stuff like that. But this is like individual documents on a timeline, essentially, even though they're considered pages. But it's, in terms of storyboard artists, these are frames, you know, that makes it super great that you could literally look at what we see here on a page layout. I don't generally draw them like this. I put them in after for, you know, so you can put the dialogue and text and stuff. But this is the process here, is having a big canvas and then be able to move on to the next one, kind of thing. So yeah. And if I could, sorry, I'm doing most of the talking here, but as a comment to speed, which is kind of funny, I don't know if I ever told David this. So when I was in college, one of my favorite and early DVDs was the Gnomon DVD that he had done on Production Pipeline. In fact, his main character I modeled after that Production Pipeline character, which I'm pretty sure even back in the day he had this in mind, right? So I figured I'd throw that in there. I wonder if he actually recognized it enough, but I didn't know back then that those were sped up. So I assumed that was the pace I had to maintain to be a professional working artist. And kind of that's what I'm known for, is making something that's not the best in the world, but it's halfway decent at an insane, you know, kind of speed. I also heavily influenced by, you know, comic book artists that go to these conventions, not unlike Lightbox, and do these commissions in under 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and kind of study what they're doing. And it's like, oh, they know how to draw the same kind of poses and, you know, faces over and over again because they do it so often. And I was like, I could definitely apply that to storyboarding, because for the most part in most productions, we're all doing close-ups, medium shots, wide shots, 3/4, straight on. You draw them enough times, you can draw them with your eyes closed, kind of thing. So those were kind of the influences that kind of drove me into the it's kind of a double-edged sword, because people now expect me to draw everything like super fast and get things done into super fast. I can charge a lot for that, but I'm doing a lot of turnover, which is insane.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. The idea of rapid iteration in that regard, that's another theme that we've talked a lot about, is speed versus, you know, doing the same thing in a short amount of time over and over and over, as you just described, kind of burns it into your brain. And if you were to go back and then start from scratch and then compare that to somebody who spent the same amount of time doing one drawing, and then that person
Right.
is trying to do the same thing, you're the person who did it over and over and over in a short amount of time is going to be able to get that same result much more quickly. And it just goes to show the power of practice and repetition, and how important that is to be able to be an efficient artist.
It certainly is, and I think it actually is a different school of thought for what you're working on. Because I know today I follow a ton of YouTube artists, storyboard artists, guys like Ethan Becker. I know, I'm trying to remember some of the other names of the guys. I mean, even guys like Ross Trent, you know, it's like it's interesting to them talk about how they study and stuff like that, because the idea nowadays is not necessarily how many miles you put on those wheels. It's more or less like, what's the most efficient way to get there, almost like spending space to get there, like study with intention, you know, where I always struck personally. I think there's two schools. I think it has to do with the personality that you have and the kind of artist that you grew up being. Me, I'm a mileage guy. I'm like, it needs to be like I can do it with my eyes closed. And the only way I can do it with my eyes closed if it becomes physical. They call it mental memory or whatever, but for me, it's like physical. Like I could probably draw this with my eyes closed because my hand knows the position on the screen like a blind person. It's like, and I only get that from doing it a million times. That's not necessarily the more modern train of thought with that. Like, opening up Woodbridge and drawing the rotation of the torso 200 times. That's what I did. It worked for me for what I do now. But if I were a concept artist, maybe it would require a more refined sort of difference of using a dagger and a club,
Yeah.
kind of thing,
Yeah, no, I completely hear what you're saying, and that is also a good point to bring up to kind of amend that statement because it is true.
Yeah.
Each of us works differently. That is one way to get to the same result, but others do kind of go the patient route and will have the same amount of precision. So I think, like, yeah, as you said, it is memory, but it's muscle memory. There's a physical response that your hand gets accustomed to the position on paper or on screen or whatever that is. And however your brain works and stores that stuff, that's the most important thing. But it seems to be that just draw and draw and draw a ton, and try to be able to let go of the imperfect results and not be too married to make each line so precise all the time. Sometimes you need to, but a lot of times you probably don't.
I think what we could take away from both schools that is infinitely value is being able to edit yourself. For instance, in these piece of craps I just drew, I can tell you, all right, this nose is way too high. That should have honestly been there. And these eyes are way too far apart. Being able to go back and if you do have time to make your stuff look pretty, you need to know not why you did it wrong. You did it wrong because you're trying to do it as fast as possible. But now that you have some time, how do we make it look nicer? How do we you still have to know the foundations to be able to edit yourself. And you can't always have your art director wasting time to tell you how to draw eyes and hands. You need to be able to, but he'll let it slide for the first, second draft. But by third or fourth, it's like, do you know how to draw?
Because it does need to tighten up a little bit further as you move down that timeline.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think those two train of thoughts are really important. I think one of the great books too that really helped me a few years ago was Framed Ink. I think that's pretty well known among artists. Marcos Mateos, butchering that or something. Yeah. But he had a great kind of approach with just showing you all the different ways you can speak visually to tell your stories, whether it's with not color as much, more like tone, values, line. And for a majority of storyboarding, we're not doing a lot of painting most of the time. There are guys that do that are freaking amazing, or guys like Dan Milligan, who still swears to God that he's not an artist. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, Dan Milligan. He he did a lot of stuff on Uncharted, and he recently did. I'm trying to think what more recent stuff. Some of the stuff I love best from him was from Terminator Dark Fate, but they got everything. All his storyboards look like paintings, and he swears he's not like a painter, but it's just how he does it. I don't know. He's so humble about it. But yeah. Me, I've always, and maybe because my train of thought has always been in line art, like I learned how to draw from comic books. So even people often say my style is somewhat comic booky. They say there's no delineation between painting and drawing, but for me, they're completely different schools. Like lines and brush stroke rendering are totally. There's people that speak the language and they think the same. I think David's even one of them. He can draw beautiful line art and stuff, but we all know he can paint amazingly. And to him, they're the same animal. to me, they're very different.
Right. Well, and that goes to show just our interpretations of things. I think when you get to that level and you feel so comfortable in these mediums, it probably starts to blend together as the same thing. But there's subtleties and differences between those things that sometimes, as humans, it's kind of hard for us to uh, describe in words. It's more of a feeling than it is anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, what else do I want to say about anything? Storyboard. Sorry, we went on a great rant, and now
No,
I
we
just
did.
slipped on the brakes.
These are truly all great points, and honestly, just
Yeah,
watching you go through and sketch these things out with effortless energy, it's just like it is mind blowing. People walking by and stopping and staring. I mean, it truly shows that you have this level of comfortability and in your style and your ability to deliver these images. So, I mean, I think it's um, worth saying that you guys as a team have put together this incredible project, and we've been kind of unpacking bits of it throughout the weekend. So all this
yeah,
information is super valuable to new artists and people using Magma, getting into this community. That the tool itself is a priority of the conversation, but also just the foundations of art. So it's thank you for sharing all of this perspective on the foundations and the fundamentals. That stuff is the most important thing.
yeah. And if I could just add one thing, because I did remember it. When we were talking about the schools of thought of learning from the earlier days, and I am of the belief that anybody can draw and anyone can draw well. The fact is you have to like doing it. And the only reason I was never a kid who said I wanted to be an artist when I grow up. I think I wanted to join the army. I'm not even talking like when I'm 8. I'm thinking I was like 18 and I was ready to enlist. And my mom wouldn't let me. She's like, if you go, not that she's not patriotic or anything, she's just someone who wants to protect her, baby and stuff like that. And she did believe in me. She was like, you have too much talent to, you know.
Good for your
Long
mom.
story short, it was never my intention. I only got better because I liked doing it and I liked learning how to make a pretty picture. And I think today it's an advantage and disadvantage for younger artists that are developing because they have the plethora of YouTube and the internet and online schools that can like really propel at a state that's so much faster than what I had and people before me had. But they also there's so much more pressure. There's so much more competition, or at least maybe the competition was there, but it wasn't as in your face. I mean, the 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 example is Lightbox itself. The reason I'm not there in person is because I don't want to feel like a piece of crap at looking at all the amazing art around me. It's like
I couldn't
no,
agree more. Honestly,
yeah.
that's the underlying theme for sure. Being here,
But
it's
if I
overwhelming
think
at
that
times.
it is overwhelming, but I think the through line in both accounts, whether you did it 20 years ago or you're doing it today, is if you focus on the part that you enjoy doing the art, you'll do it more often and you'll get better at it. I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, no one's better at brushing their teeth or tying their shoes than anyone else. The fact of the matter is, you do it every day, something's going to happen. That mileage is going to get there. So, but most of the times, the mileage is going to get there because you have to enjoy it. And actually, that's what I appreciate about Ross. He encourages people to study in ways that is enjoyable to them. If we all have to learn anatomy, drawing skeletons and drawing muscles and drawing squares and cubes, but draw a square that is a Borg cube from Star Trek or something. Finding ways to make the boring stuff interesting, and I think that's what's going to keep people on their journey. And when people are struggling, I notice I ask them the question, how much are you drawing? Or even with the school of thought today of like, you know, study with intent and purpose, like focus on the right things and do it right. Even if you're not doing a million iterations or a million repetitions, it's like how long, even if you're doing it intently with laser focus, how long are you doing it for that laser focus? And what did you walk away with it? Like, did you mentally check with yourself to be like, I figured this out today? And you're going to you're going to have to figure out a way to put some sugar, in it. You know what I mean? Helps the medicine go down, you know? But I think that's the key for any artist that's like, is watching Lightbox videos or is at Lightbox and is a kid or is 50 years old. Just remember to like doing it. enjoy the drawing process, and before you focus too hard on trying to get a job with it, of that pressure of like, well, if I'm not David Levy, how am I even gonna, pay my bills? I mean, I was waiting tables for like 20 years, from basically I was 13 working at a country club to when I was 26 going to school, and then went to other small schools like Noman and Red Engine and learning from people like David. But I was still waiting tables so I could focus on learning and not focus about learning on the job. Now, some people will say it's better to learn on the job. If you get in the door, it's great to learn on the job, but most of us don't. And I didn't, because I wasn't there. I had to learn, I had to relearn. Even though college did not prepare me for what I needed to do, I had to go back. And I was only focused on enjoying the process, and it paid off. And I think that would be something I'd like to leave with any young artist today.
That's incredible wisdom, and your passion truly does show through. And we hear these stories all the time, but they are the most impactful. The passion pursuits, and just finding something that you love, not doing it for the sake of becoming a famous artist or being well known. A lot of times to get there, you just have to love the hell out of the thing that you're doing and just want to learn and grow and be better, not to compare or be better than someone else, just to grow as a person. And people like you that are able to articulate that and provide analogies and examples as to how you got there, that stuff is the most important thing. So I think that's a wonderful place to leave it at. And thank you so much for
and Magma's free, so don't let the price of drawing software be a sort of obstacle for you to not learn and just practice, and then being able to learn with other people online in real time. I mean, I can imagine if I was 18 years old back in the day with whatever rudimentary Wacom tablet they had back then, drawing with some other person online with my dial-up, be like, how'd you draw that nose? That nose is so good. Oh, let me break it down for you in real time with you. I mean, this tool in itself can be so educational on top of production. I mean, I swear, I mean, just having that, if I could get Adam Hughes on this, it'd be like, show me how you draw these gorgeous women, but he'll never draw on a computer. He never will. But that too. All right. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on storyboarding, and Moon Control is an awesome project. I'm so proud to be a part of it and working with this great team, and Magma's great, and it's only going to get better. So absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Frank. Honestly, that was amazing. That's a perfect one to end on. We're wrapping up our day here. Everybody's going to start heading home soon. This is probably one of the best ones we've done, and I think just your insight is super awesome to hear. So it's going to be great for new people that are getting into Magma or any tool to hear this information for that matter. So I wish we could have done it in person, man, but it's been a pleasure to get to know you and see your project.
Absolutely.